Welcome to the Romanian River channel and my playthrough of Dwarf Fortress. The game I've selected to fill my required token of fire and water in terms of strategy games. Why? Because we need to have a nice selection of games to show, and what better choice in terms of strategy games to replace Sword of Stars than probably the only game in its category. Of course, there are games that try to copy it, like RimWorld, to a degree Prison Architect, and there was another one, No Mori I think it was called. But they are, well, to be honest, they are for-profit, slightly less indie games. This is distilled craziness in a bottle. A game that'll probably be an alpha longer than I'll be considered young, to be honest. And to be fair, it's probably a game I'll play for quite a few years from now on. Well, slight disclaimer before we begin, which is kind of odd for a let's play, but well warranted. This game is glitchy as fuck sometimes. You can get a decent world, decent location to start your fortress in, and for some reason either the game decides to shit on you from the get-go, which is more in terms of roguelike element, even if it's in the fortress mode, or it could go and decide when you have like 50 dwarves and your fortress is nice and built, you have a decent military, you have ironworks, you have everything you want, to be like, yeah, you're not gonna play into the 5th month of this year. Why? Because I'll crash every time. Oh, fuck you. But hopefully, this being a new version from the last one I've played, which was 2 years ago, the versions that launch take quite a few years to come out because the developer is doing this on his spare time, so it's a labor of love, and it's probably more than you'll ever get for a free game in terms of actual features. But yeah, hopefully that was either fixed by the developer in terms of my own issues, or the fact that I'm playing on a machine that's about two, maybe 3 times more powerful in terms of raw CPU power than the one I played the last time, might actually fix it. That said, the game itself has 3 modes, and we'll be playing Fortress mode just to be clear. The other 2 being Adventure mode, which is what I like to term masochism mode, because in Fortress mode you're causing other people to die, dwarves, because you don't have the option to play as other races. Currently you may have it someday, but I don't think in the near future. While in Adventure mode you have one guy, which is you. Could be multiple races if I'm not mistaken. You can even be a kobold if I'm not in error. And you face the same permadeath conditions as the dwarves do in Fortress mode. The third mode being the option to actually explore the history of the world you created. Creation of the world itself is either via the standard way, which is selecting some vague parameters to a large degree and hitting yes to create the world. Then there's also the advanced mode with advanced parameters and yada yada yada. We're gonna go with simplicity because we sound Russian, may as well be Russian in terms of practicality. So let's initiate the creation mode. Here we have a slight blurb giving us details about the game, how we could possibly help it, either via modding help, because this game is quite moddable, which is one of its main saving graces in terms of accessibility, or even if you want to donate. there's a small tip jar type option, but it's not gonna get you anything special. Just the feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment for helping somebody who created basically the gaming equivalent of a saw machine, basically. You can enjoy this game in its raw form. You can make it slightly easier downloading certain packs made by the community, which convert the graphics, which are normally in ASCII. And if anybody needs an idea how to visualize ASCII graphics, especially the younger people, just Google Rogue game 1980 something. When you see the first result in Google Pictures, you'll get the idea of how the graphics looks unmodded. There are several modes which help it. Usually the simplest ones are skin packs, which interpret the ASCII and replace the visual representation with something closer to a image you can recognize. Like, for example, instead of a D for dwarf, you actually see a dwarf. Yeah, quite impressive. Also, the control scheme becomes a bit more easier with noob packs. The noob pack, for example, because it activates what little mouse interactivity is possible. Otherwise, at least with the first versions of the game, I'm not too sure, because I haven't actually played vanilla Dwarf Fortress in years, but via the lazy noob pack personally. But back in the oldie days, you had to actually hack into enable mouse at all. Otherwise it was just vestigial. Everything else you did was, well, everything you did, not everything else, was done via the keyboard. And that is quite a departure from any sort of gaming people from, let's say, 1997 onwards. No. But it can be quite a interesting trip. That said, I'd recommend the Lazy Noob mod because it adds in quite a lot of features you don't get otherwise in the vanilla version. Like, for example, Dwarf Therapist, if you need to get an idea of how to exploit your dwarfs best. Like, for example, if you need a crafting dwarf for your craftsman shop, you can look into the dwarfs you got and see which one would be most adequate for the job if you don't have one already. Usually tell that by how easy they gain experience in the field by scrolling over and basically getting like percentages. Besides that, there are also other graphics mods I haven't used. Like, for example, there's a isometric mode for the game, and even a Unity based mode for it, which turns into Unity graphics. But to be honest, we're gonna go with the vanilla visuals. Vanilla as in interpreted ASCII, not raw ASCII. Besides that, what else can I say? Oh yeah, I'm never ever going to play adventure mode. I only tried it once, and suffice to say, it's not for me. I'm more of a sadist than a masochist whenever I get the option. So watching dwarf go slowly crazy is much more interesting for me than me being the one slowly going crazy. Of course, people may be like, yeah, but that's not as fun. Give Fortress mode a chance, especially if I make it to like 100 dwarves and there's temper tantrum spiral or something like that. Yeah, you'll see me getting pissed off there too, but much more amusingly, less angry German kid. Now let us continue. Your basic selection of options, you have world size, which we're gonna go with large. Very self-explanatory, how big the world is. I go with large because I prefer less clusterfucks. History, I go with, let's go with short with this one, to have a nice amount of interesting stuff that could possibly happen. if you the history itself, if you go with very short, you're basically in the era in which mythical beasts and other crazy stuff can happen. With short, you can kind of see more. It's still got mythical beasts and stuff like that, but you also start seeing from sentient species, like for example humans. You also start seeing necromancers and more interesting stuff like that. More sentient species interaction rather than mythical beasts, dragons, and so on and so forth. I've never actually played with long or very long, but I'd assume with very long, for example, you can also start getting into situations where you can reclaim cities or fortresses or whatever. But we're gonna go with short. Keep it magical, but is also mythical. With civilizations, we're gonna go with low to reduce the number of interactions, but also enhance the, how should I put this, the level of seriousness you'd have to have with your relationship with other species. Because for example, if there's a metric shit ton of elven civilizations, you don't give a shit if you piss one off and they invade you and you kick the shit out of their invasion force, because they're elves versus dwarves Uberales. We're gonna go with low because yeah, as stated, number of sites, number of cities they can spawn over time, basically cities besides your own. So dwarven fortresses, elven cities, or however they prefer to call their villages in huts and stuff like that. Elves basically. Humans, not kobolds, goblins. Kobolds, if I'm not mistaken, are semi-sentient, so they don't build cities, but they are quite a nuisance if you don't have a military, well, an amateur grade military at least to deal with them. Number of beasts are well, it's kind of self-explanatory. Increasing this setting makes large beasts more prevalent. We're gonna keep it at medium just to increase the possibility of craziness, but we're not gonna go very high because, as I said, I'm not a masochist. Savagery, we're gonna keep the medium because the more savage the world, the more possibilities you're gonna get attacked by wildlife, like wolves, bears, cougars, leopards. You get the idea. And mineral occurrence, we're gonna keep it to sparse because we don't want to be uber easy and basically have a map that's filled with gems, iron, copper, so on and so forth, but neither do we want to be very rare to basically be like, oh my god, we have tin on this map, we're so rich. Keep it sparse, so you also have the ability to get most of what you need from one location and also have enough to trade. Very important. Let us hit the generation and see what we get. The plane of forever. Forever alone? Possibly. Let's see what it spits out. We may have to do several world generations depending on how I like the world. But it won't be because of, how should I put this, of any specific thing, but because of how it actually looks to me. I'm quite fickle when it comes to how worlds look. Oh, for example, that piece of purplish land we saw earlier, that was in piece of the world, if I'm not mistaken, it was a jungle that classes as an evil biome. Evil biomes are basically, see this, let me just move the X because you guys can't see the cursor for some fucked up reason. See this bit here? That is an evil biome. Evil biomes are basically filled with creatures which are hostile by default and they're quite dangerous. The darker the shade of purple, because if I'm not mistaken that's close to fuchsia, and no, I swear I'm not gay, the more dangerous the biome, basically. The more odds you're gonna get zombies, undead, vampires, necromancers, you know, all the good stuff. No, we're not gonna be playing that for a start. The light bluish one is a good biome. Creatures here are not hostile by default, but if you piss them off, they're about as dangerous as the evil biome, more or less. A unicorn can kill your ass just as easily as an undead swordsman, basically. But I don't really like the look of this world. A bit too fragmented and not symmetrical. We're gonna go with one more generation. Same conditions. The universes of wind. Okay, so this is a schizophrenic world. Let's see how much it shows in its physical nature. Oh, in terms of places we're gonna start off in, ideally I'd want flux-stone, shallow metals, which are iron, copper, tin, and other such lovely things. And if at all possible, a river nearby, a decent amount of ground elevation, so we get a option to basically fortify. Okay, so this world has ice on the bottom and an evil glacier by the looks of things. Always good to see, because nothing says interesting like freezing your ass off while getting surrounded by zombies. Well, this world is symmetrical. The land of cities. The terrible ice. Nah. We're gonna go with one more generation. The planet of legends. Okay, at least the name on this one sounds less retarded. Most Let's Plays of Dwarf Fortress don't show this bit because people consider it boring. To be honest, if you guys don't like watching this, you can always skip on to the second part of the Let's Play, which will feature the beginnings of the Fortress mode. But I show this bit because, well, you need to know how to set up your stuff, and you need to know the fact that getting a decent world is not as easy as it looks. Some people even use advanced parameters generation to input seeds that usually get out something interesting. Okay, so we have a shit ton of ice at the bottom, decently integral world, it's symmetrical. Yeah, looks promising. The one thing that kind of pisses me off with world generation currently is you can't check out to see the mineral abundance, which is quite a difficult thing to gauge without hitting accept and praying for the best. So with that in mind, start praying. Now, as I said, during world generation, not only the world is generated, but also a history for it. Granted, you'd have to be a bit more into the lore side than I am, But if you're curious, it certainly is there, and while the grammar and the syntax could use some work, at least it is something you will rarely see in most other games. Now, the part of the world generation is done. Time to see if you can actually find somewhere to settle. The idea with this particular screen is to let a certain unit of time pass between, for example, when you head in for the first time, and then when you head back in, for example, when you try to reclaim a settlement. This is just basically give you a degree of difficulty in terms of reclaiming something, so you don't basically do like I did in like I do in Path of Exile, which is basically just keep grinding and grinding and grinding until it comes out well. Trying to reclaim a fortress that's been empty for a while can be quite interesting, considering the fact that you may get, how should I put this, issues with ghosts, mad dwarves and stuff like that, because when you lose a settlement you usually can't bury, well, there's nobody left to actually bury the dead, and if any dwarves survived beyond that point but were insane, they could still be alive in the fortress and still try to kill anybody that comes near it. Now, we selected Fluxstone layer because Fluxstone is used to create steel from iron and burning coal to heat it. Aquifer we do not want because aquifers are a pain in the ass to deal with. We'll try to avoid it as much as possible. To be honest, we'll avoid it with all costs. River, yes, because it gives us an option to have a source of food even if we run into issues with farming, either above ground or below. Shallow metals, as I said, iron for steel manufacturing, bronze, well, copper and tin for bronze if possible. If not, a little bit of copper won't ruin the pot because we'll have it to create jewelry and stuff like that. Deep metals if possible because you'd get gold, silver, stuff like that. The native kind, not the alloyed kind. And the others don't really count as much for me. Let us begin the search. Now, in terms of the game itself, the graphics are not demanding at all. The load on my GPU at the current time, exactly right now, is about the same as it would be if I was watching a YouTube video. But the game is deceptive in that sense. You'd be like, okay, so this thing could probably run on a tablet. Yeah, in terms of graphics. But the CPU on a tablet, unless it's one of the ones with an i3 or an i5, possibly one of the Celeron ones, or the Pentium ones if there even is a Pentium tablet, possibly, it won't run because the game is incredibly intensive in terms of CPU, as I've mentioned as I alluded to earlier. The graphics will never tax anything, but the CPU will be quite loaded. I can't check right now, but I'm pretty sure the CPU is sitting at about 50% doing this, which is quite a bit considering the CPU is not that old in terms of technology. Now, and just to explain, so the tablets themselves, if they could, in theory, run it on an ARM CPU, which they can't due to missing feature sets, which the game requires. If they could, they'd probably face slight incendiary issues due to the high amounts of stress. But for, as I said, for Intel i5 or i3 enabled tablets should run quite well and should be a decent enough ROM. Of course, you'll need a keyboard, but if you manage to actually run this on a tablet, you're already probably 70% there. Finding a USB keyboard with a adapter for whatever mini USB port you have will be the least of your issues. So the results, as you can see a part of them right now, are promising. There's a couple of areas in the warm belt area, which is good. Ideally, I'd want a warm, heavily forested with a river nearby area, because that will allow us to fish all year round, collect fruit most of the year, and only have to deal with slight extra heat issues with the dwarfs. They drink more water or more beer regularly. Dwarves are quite weird in that sense, because, to be honest, you'd think drinking alcohol would dehydrate them, but nope. Give them alcohol and they'd probably live off it for the rest of their bloody lives. Like true dwarves do. Let's see. You have shallow metals, but it's hot. Hot is a bit too hot. They'd guzzle beer like no tomorrow. We'll keep that in mind, but let's look at the other ones. Mirthful. Freshwater's marsh. The moderate vegetation. You'd think that wouldn't be too important, but you can collect fruit or above ground damn it, it's late, my mind's shutting down. Above ground crops from their wild variants, and basically start harvesting that way. In one of my playthroughs I actually had a farm with onions above ground. My dwarves seem to like it. If I'm not mistaken, they were making onion wine at one point. I wonder if that's still a thing in this version. Come on. I'd want heavily forested, because if we don't get a coal or lignite, yeah, that's the word, lignite, deposit in our map, we'll need to rely on burning wood into charcoal to... Ooh, this is scorching hot. Nope. Burning wood into charcoal to use to fuel our iron industry. So this is a nice enough area. Trees sparse. This is a bit better, but we have an aquifer to deal with. No bloody way. Cold poses the other part of the problem, because your dwarves can freeze to death, which is never a fun thing. Especially if that dwarf is somebody else's spouse. Then you can get lovely situations where your legendary swords dwarf, be it male or female, decides to go postal because her husband died. At which point she goes basically Xena the warrior princess, and you lose the fort. Not a particularly glorious way to end a playthrough, but could be worse. Could be much worse. Okay, this is gonna be a interesting game. Let us at least find the embark. Well, we're gonna have to. But these are. This is a problem because these are, if I'm not mistaken, goblin cities. So if we start here, we're gonna be in invasion territory. And these are dwarven cities. Oh dear god. How do we balance this shit out? How indeed. What in the... That's a road, if I'm not mistaken. Been a few years since I've seen one of those in the game. Romania isn't that poor, please. Okay, so this is another one, but yeah, this is gonna be one of those days where you can't find a decent starting point. That one's got an aquifer. Those are badlands, so you're fucked if you don't have food. Sparse trees. Down there's a desert. Another desert. I'm beginning to think this game really hates my ass. So the only real option is next to bloody goblins or freezing my ass off. So what do we prefer, freezing or goblins? We're trying to locate a nice hill. Which one was to change the size? Shift. That's a bit better. Now having a bigger area can pose issues with your processor, but I think we have a big enough area to play with in terms of processing power. Yeah, let's see how this works. Now, like we have selected a large area. Choose a smaller area if you experience lags. But this part we'll do in the next session because we're already at 36 minutes. Sorry for going so long, lads, but yeah, this is a difficult world. Anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, buff the